Well, let's get more on this now. Joining me now is Richard Barrett, who's former Director of Global Counter-Terrorism Operations at MI6. A very good evening to you, Richard Barrett. Thanks so much for joining us. So Shamima Begum has lost her bid to regain her British citizenship today. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm disappointed for her, and I'm disappointed that the SIAC, the Commission, was not able to take into account all the other factors of this case. I mean, they just looked at it from the point of view of had the Home Secretary, then Home Secretary, acted lawfully, not whether his decision was right or not. And myself, I think the decision was wrong. I think if it was made on national security grounds, there are all sorts of other aspects of national security that would have mitigated against his deprivation of her citizenship. And that, of course, is a particularly draconian measure because first of all, she was a child when she left the UK. Second, she hasn't had a chance to argue her case in court. And third, you know, she's stuck now in some sort of limbo without any prospect of returning to her family, nor really of being a free woman. She's only 23, she's got a lot of her life left, and she's stuck in a camp in northeast Syria, which is not particularly safe place to be for anybody, let alone a woman of that age. Where does she go? What happens to her? That camp is a temporary camp. It's certainly not going to last for very many more years. And whose responsibility is it to think of her future, look after her, if you like, if not her country of citizenship, country of birth, and country of residence, which is the UK?
Well, the Commission did acknowledge, didn't they, that although there was credible suspicion that Begum was trafficked for sexual exploitation, they said that was insufficient for the Commission to deem the Home Secretary's decision unlawful. And they said essentially it was up to the Home Secretary to decide what was in the public interest, essentially saying it was up to politicians on the advice of security services rather than lawyers.
Yes, indeed. That's a shame, isn't it? I mean, that is the conclusion they came to, and the conclusion that's born really of a previous appeal by Shamima Begum, which she lost, and went to Supreme Court, who effectively gave the Secretary of State those powers that, on grounds of national security, he could really make the decision and leave it unchallenged. So it is a question I think we have to ask ourselves, as the general public. Well, on what basis did he make this decision? Can we know more about it? And can we understand why this young woman was such a almost existential threat to the UK?
Well, yes, I mean, you're a former Director of Global Terrorism Operations at MI6. What's your view on how much of a threat she might be, given that she did leave the country to join a terrorist organisation?
Yeah, well, since holding that position, I've spent a long time, over 12 years, at the United Nations dealing with these terrorist issues and talking to very many countries about how to cope with radicalization, how to promote de-radicalization, and how to undermine the terrorist appeal. And I think that depriving her of her citizenship and banning her from coming back to her country, that I think everyone would agree is her national base rather than Bangladesh, even if she has a right to Bangladeshi citizenship. I think everybody would agree that doing that feeds a narrative that's put out by terrorists that people of her ethnic origin, people of her faith, are not really welcome in Western countries, that somehow they're second-class citizens. And I think that's a very dangerous threat to national security, actually, let alone the individual threat that any person who supports the Islamic State might pose.
What are the implications of this decision, do you think? Does it set a precedent for other British nationals or dual nationals who are currently in refugee camps?
Well, yes, of course it does. But again, I would say that the Commission was looking at this case on very narrow grounds indeed. See, actually, was the decision lawfully made? Not whether it was a good decision or not. And I hope that in future cases there might be much more deference to the appellant, if you like, as to the reasons they went, the reasons they stayed, and the threat they may pose at the moment, rather than just accepting a rather quick decision by the Secretary of State that the national security interest was best served in stopping these people come back.
OK, well, Richard Barrett, we appreciate your views tonight. Thanks very much indeed for sharing them with us.
Sure.